Les origines de Noël. So this is the last part of our information about the Advent period in Europe and basically the background and history of it because since European settlers came to America, this is also the story of Christmas in America or the origins of it. All right, so you have to consider that in the past, people's lives was set on the pace of seasons. Right now, we're very much out of touch with nature, especially since we live in cities um, and we have a lot of technology. But for the longest time, nature dictated what was happening in people's lives. They were at the mercy of the weather, of the conditions varying throughout the year. So there were certain traditions that were really tied into the cycle of nature. So that's why each season has traditions based on nature and on people's needs. So for instance, in the spring, you have to sow the seeds that you will harvest later on. So typically, the fall is harvest season, and the season before winter is a preparation for the harsh season. So traditions and celebrations show us what has been important to each civilization for centuries and often thousands of years. So there's really a lot more than you may think behind those celebrations. It also shows us people's way of life in the past. So we perpetuate a lot of those ancient traditions. Through time, they blend in with new ones and they layer over one another. And we do a lot of things, and we don't often know or question why we do the things we do. Okay, what does the Easter bunny has to do with the death of Christ? What does that pine tree have to do with the birth of Christ? So we're about to find out today. All right, so for instance, most of the fall celebrations in the Northern Hemisphere, such as Oktoberfest, Thanksgiving, those are harvest festivals. So you gather all the food you can and you prepare food to survive throughout the winter. Okay, remember, people were very uh, poor. They didn't have supermarkets. They had what they could find from nature or harvest from nature, and they were hoping for the best. Winter is a very harsh season when you can't go outside and gather up food. Nature is dormant. There's snow in most parts of the northern hemisphere, so you can't just go outside to get food. You can't go to the supermarket, so you have to really prepare. So this was the season where they would slaughter animals and harvest season, getting the food ready. And also, this is the time of the year where orchard fruits are ready, like apples, for instance. So people would make preserves. They would kill animals and dry the meat. And eat the stuff that they could not preserve. So there's certain parts of the food that you can preserve. We've found as humans many ways to conserve our food, but there's also certain parts that you can't. So those you get to eat. So that's why there's a lot of those festivals. So fall is a preparation period. Winter is a survival period. You have to hope for the best. Winter's always been a difficult time before because of cold and hunger, okay, and darkness. We're going to talk about darkness in a little bit. So a lot of children didn't survive in infancy. People would die of simple things like the flu or things that we can cure today. And back then, it was a dreadful time. People were scared of the winter because it meant they weren't sure if they were going to survive, if they would stay warm enough, fed enough, or healthy enough to make it to the spring. That's why there's a lot of spring celebrations. People rejoice the fact that they made it. So this is a time where people were vulnerable to illnesses and diseases, like I mentioned. In ancient times, many children, infants, and elderly did not survive in the winter. They fell ill. So this was a period that people were a little, scared of and worried about. So there's a lot of things to consider. So one thing you might not think about late today, because we have electricity, is that winter was also very difficult due to the darkness. Because of the tilt of the Earth, if you like science, the Earth is not turning on a perpendicular axis towards the sun. It's slightly tilted. And that tilt causes for the daylight to change. As you've noticed, as we get closer to December 21st, to the winter solstice, the days get shorter and shorter and the night get longer and longer. And then in the summer, that's the opposite. The closer you get to the North Pole, the longer the night in the winter. So if you think of Northern Europe, it's further north than our city. So it gets dark sooner in the afternoon. If you were in the North Pole on December 21st, you would go to 24 hours of total darkness. And if you were in the North Pole on June 21st, you would experience 24 hours of daylight. Okay, so the closer you get to the North Pole, the more you feel that effect. So imagine living through all this darkness. You didn't have electricity. The little bit you had was a fire or some torches to walk around, but that's not much. Even with the flashlights, you know how scary the woods can be in the dark. I'm sure you've seen plenty of horror movies about walking in the woods in the dark. So, to explain the traditions of the Advent period in December, we need to really remember those things. We need to start in the fall and consider the period leading to winter in the Northern Hemisphere. So, people being scared of darkness, hunger, illness, and cold. Okay, so those were the things that people dreaded. So the day where the Earth is tilted is the furthest away from the sun in the northern hemisphere is December 21st. This day is called the Winter Solstice. And it's no coincidence that our Christmas celebration falls around that time, that a lot of those festivals fall around that time. Most civilizations celebrate the Winter Solstice. Okay, ancient civilizations were very aware of astronomy. They were very aware of the cycle of the planets and what was going on with our solar system. So the winter solstice is the shortest day and longest night in the North Pole. There is a 24-hour night. I don't know if you can see here. Okay, so where we're at. So Europe would be, so France is right here. Okay, the North Pole being right here. So imagine the sun is shining right here. So if you're in the equator, that's the only place where it doesn't change all year long. You get 12 hours daytime, 12 hours nighttime. And then in the summer, it's the opposite. It tilts forward this way and you have more sunlight. But in the winter, okay, so El Paso is around the same latitude as North Africa. Okay, right here. But for France, look, we're right here. So you're really closer to the North Pole, so it gets pretty dark. So the Romans, just like the Celts, so we'll talk about two ancient civilizations today, the Romans and the Celts. So the Romans and the Celts were civilizations way before Christianity, before Jesus was even a concept, before Christianity and Catholicism were even a concept. So the Romans and the Celts had many winter festivities during the winter solstice. As I said, most civilizations do know about the winter, the summer solstice, the equinox, so the cycle of the planets. So one of them for the Romans was a several-day-long celebration called Saturnalia. During Saturnalia, the Romans had feasts where they would eat and drink a lot, and they would exchange gifts. And even the slaves were served a festive meal and given more freedom. So there was this traditions of those several-day festivals where people exchange gifts. Okay, this is going to become important. Remember, we're talking about the origins of Christmas. So this was a long, long time ago. So let's talk about the Celts, the ancient Northern European civilizations. So the Celts are the civilizations that were at the time in northern France, Great Britain. You probably know about the Vikings or the Norse, people who lived in Scandinavia. So those civilizations had traditions that we still carry out today. And this is where we should look to understand many of the things we do during Christmas season. So one of the things they did to bond together, to brace themselves and psych themselves for winter, to ward off the darkness and celebrate light, the ancient tribes held a 12-day festival called Yule. So now you know what Yule is. If you didn't know before, if you listen to Christmas songs, they talk about Yule, Yule log, Yule, and you probably wondered if you didn't know, what is Yule? Okay, so Yule was a 12-day, remember the 12 days of Christmas, a 12-day festival called Yule. So again, this is way before the birth of Christ or other stories that tied into Christmas. So there's a lot of things going on here with what we do for Christmas. So after December 21st, so December 22nd, the days started getting longer. So this was reason to rejoice, because this would lead to the spring where nature would come back to life and you could feel safe again as far as food, right? So after December 21st, which is the shortest day of the year, the days would start getting longer, and the 12 days of Yule celebrate the return of the light. The days getting longer again, the festival of lights. Okay, another festival of light we have in the Jewish tradition is Hanukkah. So there's a lot of civilizations that celebrate the return of light. Starting December 22nd, light comes back, the days get longer again. Okay, so this is very important. Remember, those civilizations didn't have electricity, so this was a big deal to have to live in total darkness. So the Norse, what they would do during Yule, they would basically take down almost an entire tree, and they would burn a giant log for all 12 days of the feast. Well, guess what? This was called the Yule log. So that Yule log was a giant trunk, a giant part of a tree that would burn for 12 days straight, if you can imagine. So that was quite a piece of wood, quite a log, the Yule log. So during 12 days, they would burn that Yule log, celebrate light, celebrate life, and again, have this bonding celebration of Yule. So they would decorate for this special occasion, and we're talking about the Celts here, and we're talking about Northern Europe. Okay, and again, this is very, very old traditions that were way before Christianity. So they would use natural elements, but what do you do in the winter? Everything's dead. It's covered in snow at this point. All the plants are dormant or dead during the winter season. So what can you find to decorate for your Yule festival? Well, guess what? A couple of plants do not die or go dormant during the winter. Those are evergreen, fir, holly, and mistletoe. So guess what? That's what they would bring into their house to decorate, which is what we still do today. Even though we don't know why, we bring in a pine tree and we bring in mistletoe and all these evergreen. Well, that's why. So our green and red decorations, Christmas trees and Christmas lights, have nothing to do at all with the birth of Jesus. They date from more ancient civilizations, much longer before that, from ancient northern civilizations. So people were putting up trees and plants as decorations to celebrate the winter solstice rituals. And as you can see, the few plants that are not dormant or dead during winter in the northern hemisphere are evergreen, for holy mistletoe, and they're either green or red. Okay, so these green or red colors that we use for Christmas is something very, very ancient, that has nothing to do with the birth of Christ.
The origin of electric Christmas lights, the backstory of many of our holiday traditions, is part of the obscure but real story of Christmas. The reason behind the strange things we do each December. For instance, chopping down a tree and propping it up in our living rooms. Yet over 30 million of us will do it before December 25th. But why? It's a long story that lies nearly 2,000 years in the past, at an annual celebration practiced by the ancient peoples of Northern Europe. Every December, on the shortest day of the year, when the Earth was tilted furthest from the sun, came the Winter Solstice. It marked the darkest day of the year, but also the time when the promise of longer days gave cause to celebrate. To honor the occasion, ancient tribes held a 12-day festival they called Yule.
You have the crops brought in, you have the meat being slaughtered, You slaughter some of the farm animals because you can't feed them during the dark days of winter. So there's a lot of meat on hand. The beer has been made. It's perfect time for a feast.
The Norse burned a giant Yule log for all 12 days of the feast. And they brought evergreens, firs, and holly into their homes. Over the centuries, the concept grew, and later it was co-opted into our modern Christmas tree custom.
All right, so now you know about the Christmas tree. So let's talk about the other thing that became important around Christmas time. So when the Catholic Church, so we're talking about ancient times, we had the Romans and the Celts for many, many centuries and civilizations in Europe. They became overpowered by a very important concept after the fall of the Roman Empire. And you guessed it, yes, about 1,000 years ago, because our society was influenced by Christianity, they decided this was the year zero, and we're now in 2,000 years later, we are counting the years still based on that event. But when the Catholic Church became more widespread, in the beginning they were persecuted. Remember, we talked about St. Nicholas, but they did not approve of those ancient pagan celebrations. They did not approve of those other religions worshiping other gods and doing other things that were non-Christians. So they were trying to expand their power. And since they knew that people do not easily let go of their traditions, in the year 325, they had a council, they had a big meeting, and this big meeting actually changed our calendar. It changed a lot of things for us. And they decided at this meeting that they would celebrate the birth of Jesus at the same time as the winter solstice. And they also decided to celebrate Easter around the spring equinox to kind of fight again, to kind of detract the attention from all these pagan celebrations. We'll talk about that at Easter season, how there was a lot of spring celebrations that they did not approve of. So that's where they put Easter and the celebrations of the death of Christ. But they needed a particular day to celebrate the birth of Christ. So they decided, oh, you know what? We need to kind of take the attention away from all these winter solstice celebrations. So they wanted people to assimilate Christian celebrations to their existing celebrations in the hope that they would replace those pagan festivities with Christian festivities. It doesn't work that way because people tend to not want to give up their traditions. So the truth is, whether you're of Christian faith or not, there's no actual record of the exact day of the birth of Jesus. Okay, if you are a Christian, please do not get offended. It's not doesn't take anything away from your belief or from your celebration, but you need to understand there are no records of the exact day. There's only two gospels mentioning the nativity, the birth of Christ in the Bible, the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew. And neither of them mentions an exact date when Jesus was actually born. So the Gospel of Luke mentions the Star of Bethlehem and the Magi bringing gifts, but we don't know the actual date of the events. Okay, so this is important to remember. Early Christians did not celebrate birthdays. It was not important to them at all to know the exact day. Okay, so that's the reason why. So the Catholic Church made a conscious decision to put that celebrations of the birth of Jesus on the 25th, but we don't actually have record of the exact day. So although the Catholic Church wanted to replace the winter solstice celebrations with a Christian one, it didn't quite happen like that. Since people are usually more willing to add to their traditions than to give them up, what they did is they added more stuff to what they were already doing, and they started to layer all those different traditions. That's why we end up with different layers to many of our traditions from all the generations and the history that came before us. So that's the beauty of it, that no matter what your beliefs are, there's something in it for everyone.
For Christians, that eventful moment is where the story of Christmas begins. How do we know what we know about the birth of Jesus?
We actually have two different sources from the New Testament for the Nativity. We have the Gospel of Matthew and we have the Gospel of Luke. They don't refer to one another. They may not even have known about each other, and they tell us two different sets of things about what happened for Jesus' birth. And what we tend to do is we put these two stories together to get a kind of full picture that we call the Nativity.
But no one recorded when this actually happened. Nobody knows the true date of Jesus' birth. And early Christians didn't celebrate birthdays. So how did Jesus end up with a birthday on December 25th? Long before Jesus was born, the Romans celebrated many pagan holidays, particularly in December. And these end-of-year festivities set the stage for our modern Christmas holiday.
One Roman holiday was Saturnalia, which began on December 17th and was a series of parties that would last anywhere from 3 to 5 or maybe 7 days. You can think of it as sort of a big office party, but in togas.
Romans exchanged gifts at Saturnalia, just as we do at Christmas. Slaves were served a special feast by their masters and enjoyed freedoms that they lacked any other time of the year.
The second party is New Year's. It was a 5-day party, and it was quite enjoyable as well. And then in between Saturnalia and New Year's, there was already a birthday celebration for a Roman-related god on December 25th.
That god, Mithras, and still another god, Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, were both honored on December 25th. Since the date fell near the Winter Solstice, the same celestial event celebrated by the tribes of Northern Europe, Romans lit ritual bonfires and candles to push back the darkness, the origin of our modern Christmas lights.
The winter solstice is the darkest day of the year. You know how dark it is when you get up. You know how dark it is before the end of the day. You can't wait for the sun to come back. Pagans all over the world celebrate that darkest day. And in Roman religions, it becomes central to the year.
After Christianity became Rome's official religion in the 4th century, leaders chose to absorb pagan traditions rather than outlaw them. This is when the church finally decided to honor Jesus' birth, choosing a date close to the winter solstice, December 25th. But as the church continued to absorb various ancient traditions, what emerged were two experiences of Christmas, one religious, one less so.
In the churches, this holiday was celebrated with a pretty high degree of solemnity. People coming together, lighting candles. Christmas is being celebrated on Christmas Eve.
But outside the church, in private homes and in the town square, Christmas looked more like a big drunken block party. Ultimately, this rowdy secular Christmas would dominate the religious one. Ancient revelers would have a hard time recognizing our modern Christmas. But if you think of the holiday centuries ago as an idyllic season of peace, think again. Christmas was earthier, unrestrained, and fun.
In the high Middle Ages, of 1400, 1500, you find Christmas really picking up. Kings are talking about this and how they have huge Christmas feasts. So you find gift-giving really popular. You find sort of the lights and Yule log traditions gaining in popularity.
But Christmas was also a solemn church day to be spent in prayer. And each of these Christmases, religious and secular, also had their own separate music, just like we have today.
You have hymns in the church. They're sacred music, and they're sung in Latin. And you find gradually the development in the 12th century of Christmas carols. And Christmas carols are sung in the vernacular. They're not in Latin. They're in languages everybody knows. And people enjoy these songs, and people sing them together. And very quickly, there gets to be the tradition of not singing these songs in church.
But medieval caroling wasn't just about singing. It was about drinking. At every door, revelers begged for a gulp from the household punch bowl, getting drunker with every note they sang.
So what Christmas looks like doesn't look an awful lot like a sort of solemn, biblically oriented holiday. It looks like something else. It looks like it's always looked, frankly. It's this kind of festival of celebration and revelry.
Clement Clark Moore, a New York professor of Oriental and Greek literature, had an idea that would change Christmas forever. In 1822, he wrote a 56-line poem he called A Visit from St. Nicholas, better known today as The Night Before Christmas. Almost single-handedly, he created the modern American vision of Christmas.
What's really interesting about Moore's poem is it distilled various traditions in the early 19th century and put them all together and added Moore's own imaginings. Moore's poem becomes a path-breaking moment, a watershed in how Christmas is celebrated.
Moore's subject was Santa as we know him today. His inspiration? Two legendary Christmas figures of the old world. One was St. Nicholas, a 4th century bishop renowned for gift-giving, legendary for leaving presents in stockings. The other was Sinterklaas, the Dutch version of St. Nicholas. Sinterklaas had merged a bit with Odin, the pagan god of Yule, who flew through the sky on an 8-legged horse.
Before the mid-19th century, Santa Claus comes in different shapes and sizes. He arrives, on a boat, on a horse, on a sleigh, and all of that sort of codified and narrowed down in America, largely in New York City.
Both Old World legends were rich in details, many of which Moore chose to leave out. One omission was a bizarre, dark, devil-like companion of St. Nicholas, who might bring a switch to punish naughty children, or worse.
In Northern Europe, there was a sort of devil figure that accompanied St. Nicholas. He had horns, long red tongue, covered with fur, tail, and hoof, and he would come into the room right after St. Nicholas. And one scene in particular shows 2 little boys cowering because outside the door is this devil figure, Krampus.
But Clement Clark Moore's St. Nick embodied only good. Moore introduced several new characteristics for Santa. He dressed him in American fur, gave him a pipe, and portrayed him not as a priest, but a jolly, dimpled elf with a twinkle in his eye. On his back, he toted a sack full of toys for the children of the house. Moore also gave him a sleigh that he flew through the sky, led not by a horse, but by 8 reindeer, each with its own name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen. Moore's poem enthralled 19th century Americans. It created a new kind of Christmas, neither rowdy nor religious, but centered on home and family. In the decades that followed, artists would expand on Moore's imagery, but his would be the vision that would endure. In 1862, one of America's major magazines, Harper's Weekly, commissioned Nast to draw its Christmas illustrations. He transformed Moore's jolly old elf into someone taller and grander.
So he becomes your grandfather. Gives him the full flowing white beard, which is the image of a wealthy person in the Victorian world. He was wearing a red coat with white trim, black boots, the buckled belt, the pipe.
Nast's image of Santa became indelible, and with every Christmas grew richer in its detail.
Nast does this year after year. He creates lots of the things we associate with Santa Claus. The list of naughty and nice, living at the North Pole, and that becomes the image of Santa Claus.
September 23, 1848, the Illustrated London News published an image of the young Queen Victoria and Prince Albert with their family assembled around a Christmas tree, part of Albert's German tradition. England fell in love with it immediately.
2 years later, this same image of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert was republished in a very popular American magazine with a couple of alterations. They took out Queen Victoria's crown and took off Prince Albert's mustache so that they looked a little bit more American. And it was a way of sort of essentially telling middle-class Americans who bought this magazine that this would be a tradition. This is a tradition worthy of your home.
The Christmas tree had officially arrived in America. By 1856, President Franklin Pierce was putting one in the White House. America's redefined, kid-friendly Santa Claus and elaborately decorated Christmas tree helped to transform Christmas itself. A holiday once ruled by drunken rowdiness was now a time to celebrate the family. These days, the glow from our holiday lights and television sets helps us banish the cold, dark winter nights the way Yule logs and bonfires once did 1,000 years ago.
People make up holidays. Traditions are invented, but there are uses for those cultural tropes that stay with us for centuries. There's something about the deeper meaning there that is singing to our bones, and we hear it and we think, yes, that's the tradition, and that's what I want to celebrate.
Hopefully you realize that there's just so much to this, so many layers, so many things that you can pick and choose, and it's okay. That's the thing. There's nothing wrong with picking and choosing the traditions that are meaningful to you. So we have the gift exchange from Saturnalia, from the Romans. We have plant decorations from the Celts and the decorating of the tree. We have Yule festivals of lights from northern civilizations because of the winter solstice. We have other festival of lights like Hanukkah for Judaism is also a celebration of light. Again, remember it gets so dark in this time of year. We have the Nativity from Christianity. We have stories and time to dream for the little ones. Celebrations of lights and of communities and coming together. There's the evolution of Santa through advertisement, through newspapers and magazines. There's shopping events from commercialization of Christmas. So no matter what you celebrate or believe, I hope you find something that's special or meaningful to you during the winter season and the end of year period. And whatever you celebrate or rejoice, whatever that is, that little special thing that make you smile, may it be with someone you love. I wish you to spend the winter season with someone or people that mean a lot to you. That's the whole thing about creating traditions and bonds. It's a bonding time for humans, right? Whatever that tradition is. So, joyeuse fête in French means happy holidays. Joyeux Noël, joyeux Noël is Merry Christmas. Et bonne année, Happy New Year. And that is the end of this presentation. Hopefully you learned something interesting about Christmas.